All right, the Pelicans want to shake up their roster, and few trade partners make as much sense as the Atlanta Hawks. But is Trae Young or Dejounte Murray the better fit for the Pelicans to pair with Zion Williamson? I'll tell you and give you a trade that makes sense. It's a live episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on a Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Central. This is the Thursday show. If you're following along with me live right now, we'll have one more show later in the week for you on Friday. And trust me, that one, a couple of you've already asked about it. And that's what the show is going to be about, looking at that future Lakers pick in this draft or next draft, because there's something that I think it could be contingent on, and I'll let you know what that is in a future show, the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, coming to you in a way that nobody else does, giving you the info you want to see, looking at the draft, free agency, coaching, the roster, all of the stuff. We cover it all here, so please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over, now I can say this, 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. It's really cool to see that number, and I'm excited for this just pivotal offseason for the New Orleans Pelicans. So what we're going to do in today's show, we're going to do a normal show, 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to do a bonus segment. So I see y'all in the chat. I see your questions. Save some of your real good ones for that bonus segment when I will interact with y'all and read them off and answer them here. But we're going to look at Trae Young first, then Dejounte Murray, and a couple of other things to consider. Is there maybe a better player than one of those two that the Pelicans could go and get? But today, let's look at Trae Young, Dejounte Murray. For those in the chat following along, let me know if you have a preference on one or the other here. And we're going to look at both of them. And let's start with Trae Young. That is the biggest name of these two, a bigger name than Dejounte Murray. And on the surface, it makes sense to me, I think. There's some negative things here too. There's a give and take with both of these guys. You know, with Trae Young, it's the shooting, right? It's the shooting. This is a guy who's known as a shooter in the league. This is someone who last year took 8.7 three-point attempts per game. He shot them at the second best he's ever shot in the league, which is 37.3%. So here's the thing with that. When you look at his raw numbers, just like the pure three-point percentage, he's a career 35.5% shooter from deep. That's not a great number, right? Like, that's not good. It's not bad. It's not good. But because he takes it in such volume, because he takes deep threes too, teams need to account for him. They're not fully going to pick him up the second he crosses half court. They'll let him shoot half court shots. But you kind of need to always be aware of him and the three-point shooting. This is where you look at a guy with a combination of volume, number of attempts being high, and three-point percentage, and kind of like look at those two together to figure out who has court gravity. The eye test also backs this up. Teams shade their coverage to him, right? They are aware of where he is, and he's in the defensive game plan. When you look at this postseason, when you look at the Pelicans and some of the things they did throughout the regular season, how many guys were being ignored on offense? And oftentimes there were a lot of them, right? So Trae Young is not a guy that you can ignore. When Trae Young is cooking, you can't just let him play one-on-one. You need to put two guys out there. Look at Brandon Ingram in the playoffs, where they just allowed him to play one-on-one because they weren't worried about him whatsoever. Trae Young doesn't give you that. So while his numbers suggest he's not a good three-point shooter, there's a court gravity to him. That opens up spacing. That creates space for Zion Williamson, and I think that's truly a really good fit. The other thing to consider with him is he can control an offense in the half court. That was really what the Pelicans struggled with all season long, was half court offense. They can get out in transition and run, but in the half court without Zion, they particularly struggled. Ingram struggled, CJ struggled. Trae Young's not going to struggle in the half court. He can run an offense, and the other thing with him is he's a very good pick and roll ball handler. If you go to NBA.com/stats and you can pull the pick and roll ball handling numbers, past couple of years, he's been one of the league leaders from that area. So being able to run your offense in the half court is important. He also gets downhill. He drives more than Brandon Ingram does per game. He gets to the free throw line, 7.5 attempts last year, 8.8 the year before. And that was when they were putting in new rules to kind of get rid of some of the foul baiting and things like that. And his numbers went up with all of that. This is a guy who knows how to get to the line. There's a little bit of a gamer in him. And I like that. That's something that I think the Pelicans could really use. So there, Trae Young makes a lot of sense. You got to clean him up a little bit. There's no denying that. You know, he can be at times inefficient and a bit of a chucker, and that's not ideal when you're playing with Zion Williamson. But overall, his career numbers at 25.5 points per game on 18.6 shot attempts is pretty good. Getting to the line 7.7 times, making those at an 87% rate. How many times did the Pelicans blow games because of missed free throws? Things like that. You know, his father recently was on Twitter, like the other day, saying, you know, he's always been a number one, but that's because he's had to be a number one by the team that he's on. It's not that he wants to be a number one or he feels like he must be. He's happy to be the number two guy on a team if that's what it's going to take for the team to succeed. It's coming from his father, not him. And who knows if that's true or not. Like, that's all the stuff you would say out loud. But that's at least a little bit encouraging with it. The biggest knock on him is defense and the defensive issues. And those are very valid, right? And we'll get into this in the third segment when you look at the starting lineup, right? You know, and I'll give you a trade for him. And it's all these trades are going to have Brandon Ingram going out, not CJ McCollum going out. You know, if you have Trae Young and CJ in your starting backcourt, does that hurt you? Yeah, probably. But this team has also been good defensively with whoever is out there. And I think that's worth keeping in mind. You know, when you look at the postseason right now, Rudy Gobert just played perfect defense on Nikola Jokic and couldn't stop him. His defense was good in that game. And Jokic still dropped 40. Offense is winning. Offense is winning. It's not that defense doesn't matter, but you have to have the balance between the two. Getting Trae Young on this team balances you out a little bit. So I think that's something that's worth keeping in mind. More on that in the third segment here. So here's the trade, and tell me what you think. Brandon Ingram, Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels, and a future first-round pick for Trae Young and Clint Capella. And that move saves Atlanta about $12 million. We'll talk more about this in the next segment here, but something to keep in mind with them is they're pushing the second apron. Their team is expensive for a play-in tournament team. That isn't what you want. And so they need to shed some salary. That trade saves them $12 million. You can swap out Clint Capella for Onyeka Okongwu. That's fine. That saves the Atlanta Hawks $3.7 million. Not as much as they would probably like, but that's worth keeping in mind too. So because of the situation Atlanta's in, and both New Orleans and Atlanta feeling like they need to do something, I think you can get that deal done. Brandon Ingram, Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels, and a future first-round pick for Trae Young and Clint Capella. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So coming up next, let's switch gears to the other Atlanta backcourt player, their other guard, Dejounte Murray. Does he make more sense? What about the financials with it too? That's a factor into this. Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about eBay Motors because I use eBay Motors all the time. Passion, drive, patience. It's the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your vehicle alive. And eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. I have an old car that's almost 50 years old that I've been fixing up. I drive it around the city. It's red. It's loud. It's awesome. It's driving because of eBay Motors because that's where I get my parts from. So whatever your vehicle is, a new car, an old car, whether you want to make it faster, sound louder, look cooler, you can do all of that with eBay Motors because they have over 122 million parts for your vehicle. So you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. My favorite part of this, the eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part's guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. And that their prices, this is why I keep going there. You're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home a huge win. So keep your vehicle alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only. Available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this team. It's been a fun couple of weeks here. The numbers have been through the roof. That's a testament to how much y'all care about this team. They're not in the postseason. And you care so much, you want more about them and how they can fix this and how they can get better this coming year. And we're going to be covering it all here. We even dipped our foot into the draft a little bit yesterday, and more to come on those prospects. So become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. Let me know in the comments here if you are an everydayer. I see ABJ504 with his every single day comment. There's a couple of y'all I pay attention, so I appreciate y'all so much. And that's why there's over 10,000 Pelicans fans, only Pelicans fans here, on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube page. And don't forget, in the after the third segment here, we're going to do the bonus show, a bonus part of this where I'll answer your questions with everyone who's in the chat and interact with y'all. So for your second listen, by the way, Saints schedule release. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, making sense of everything black and gold. Is the schedule tough? Is it easy? He's going to let you know what to expect from this upcoming Saints season, which better be better, I guess, than last season. So let's switch from Trae Young to Dejounte Murray, the other guard for the Atlanta Hawks. We've seen that backcourt over these past 2 years just doesn't work. They've been outscored, I believe, over these past 2 years, 6 points per 100 possessions when those two are on the court together. Like, you just can't do that. They're a play-in tournament team that's paying one of the more expensive rosters in the league. They've got to make some changes. So that's why you're seeing a lot of rumors around Trae Young, Murray, that they just can't keep going the direction that they're going with. So let's look at Dejounte Murray. He is cheaper in terms of his contract than Trae Young is. And when you compare the two, they're not particularly close. Trae Young this next season is making $43 million, $46 million the year after that. And then the final year of his deal, he's essentially making $49 million, almost $50 million basically for him in the final year of his deal. This is a guy who's all NBA. He's made 3 All-Star games. So that's not like unreasonable. And one of the things people are going to need to get used to is kind of the sticker shock of some of these salaries in the future with the new TV rights and everything like that. But Murray is cheaper. And for a team that's never paid the luxury tax, we don't exactly know if they will or not. Having a guy who gives you production on cheaper money isn't a bad thing. It's the unfortunate reality of this, even if I wish they would spend all of the money. Murray next year makes $26 million, $27.5 after that. And then he's got 2 years left, $29.5 million. And then a player option in 2027-28 for $31.6. He'll decline that. So you have him for 3 more years. The final year of his deal is under $30 million. He's going to produce more than that when you look at some of the other contracts that are going to be given out in the NBA. So he's a cheaper option for the Pelicans. That's not a bad thing, but it complicates things for Atlanta a little bit, who likely want to shed salary. But getting a guy like Murray in, and more on him, kind of how he would fit, probably allows the Pelicans to go and get a more impactful center elsewhere. Could you get Murray and Jarrett Allen? And honestly, in a deal with Murray for Brandon Ingram, maybe Atlanta needs to include picks. So it changes kind of the nature of this. Dejounte Murray is very different than Trae Young. He does not have the same kind of court gravity at all. And he's maybe slightly closer to a true point guard that a lot of people want than Young is. But Young also is a very good job. And Young, while their time has been together, has had significantly more assists than what Murray does per game. But that lack of gravity can maybe be an okay thing. While Dejounte Murray does want to take mid-range shots, he loves that, and I think we're feeling a little burned by that when it comes to Brandon Ingram, he still takes threes. Last season, he took 7.1 threes per game. He shot at 36.3%. That's not an elite number. It's not a bad number either. But at least it's someone taking threes. Brandon Ingram, by comparison, took under 4 3-point attempts per game. Simply just getting someone in the lineup around Zion Williamson that wants to take threes, that's willing to take threes, I think is a really important thing. One of the things I've long said is very few players actually space the court for Zion Williamson. What you're hoping for with guys out there is when they throw 2, 3, 4, 5 bodies at Zion, you make them pay for doing that. Dejounte Murray is a guy that will make opponents pay. Brandon Ingram didn't really make them pay because he didn't take threes. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things with him, too. This is also a guy who averages over 5.3 assists per his career. He's got a season with almost 10 assists, 9.2. Those are really good numbers here. He's also a better player than Trae Young is defensively by a large margin here. And when you look at that, that's significant, right? One of the things that you need to kind of factor in when trading for players is what's Willie Green going to think? How is he going to play them and use them? And that's an important thing. He's going to like a guy like Dejounte Murray. It really seems like it. Defensively, you'll be just fine with him. Willie Green would like him. Make of that what you will. One more thing on this too, though, is I don't know if Murray is the type of game changer, like kind of paradigm shift that Trae Young would be. I truly don't. I think if you're bringing in Murray, you're kind of just keeping more of the same, but hoping that the fit is better here than it was with Brandon Ingram. This past year, the fit with Brandon Ingram was clunky. You won't really have that problem with Dejounte Murray on this team. So I don't think this is the type of thing that people are going to look at and be like, oh, wow, what a huge move. This is a team that won 49 games last season. That's a really good number. We don't want to lose sight of that despite how poorly the season ended, right? With Murray in there, maybe that jumps you up to 53 wins, something like that. A lot's not going to change. I don't think your offense would be dramatically different than it was this past season. I think you just have a slightly better fit that makes everyone a little bit better. So it's kind of more of the same, but at least in a positive direction. That's something that's worth keeping in mind. I know everyone's treating this season like it was a huge disaster. And I even did a show saying this season is a disappointment because it was, but it wasn't a disaster. And there was a lot of good in it. Making a move for Murray is a cheaper move that factors the salary cap in, but will elevate you, but how much? And that's the big question. Or do you look for then Zion to kind of take a leap and all of those things? And that's worth keeping in mind. So the trade would be this: Brandon Ingram for Dejounte Murray and Onyeka Okongwu and a pick. A pick coming back to New Orleans in a deal like this. If Atlanta wants Larry Nance Jr., I think they can have him too. I don't think Nance was as bad as some people want to make him out to be. But you can include that in there. You could pick Capella. You could probably include Nance and maybe throw in Bogdanovich from the Atlanta Hawks as well. Something like that could definitely work. So I think that is something that could be an option for New Orleans as well. And then they'd be able to maybe go and get a Jared Allen or someone else. If you go with Trae Young, because you're adding money to this team, you're not going to be able to go and get a $20 million center. You're likely going to need to draft a center. And so you need to keep that 21st overall pick that the Pelicans have here. So that's worth keeping in mind. It's Trae Young and a drafted starting center, or Dejounte Murray and Jared Allen. Does that change your opinion of what these trades would be? Because the money is a factor into this. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. So coming up, a couple of things here, including a fun one. Could you get someone better than both of these guys? When do we expect a trade to happen? And what's the starting lineup look like with one or both of these guys? Let's talk about that. That's coming up here next. And then after that, we're doing the bonus segment here where I'm going to interact with y'all in the chat, take your questions. I see y'all chatting it up there. That's a lot of fun. We'll break it down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, big and small, and when you keep them bottled up, it can really start to affect you in a negative way. So therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. I've actually used BetterHelp before. Like, life doesn't come with an instruction manual. Sometimes it's just hard and you need to get some advice. There's nothing wrong with that at all. So go to therapy. Find someone neutral who can give you that kind of advice. Not someone who knows you extremely well is going to tell you what you want to hear, but someone who's going to help you kind of sort through some things so you can just live the best version of your life. And look, I'm a big proponent of therapy, but I don't have time to go drive to a doctor's office, sit in the waiting room, go see them, and then leave. That's too much. BetterHelp, you don't need to worry about any of that because it's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. It's entirely online, so you just schedule your appointments, you sit down on your phone, your computer, and you're having your session, and you're going to feel so much better and save a ton of time. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know, doing a live show here right now. And after this coming up segment, we are going to talk with y'all. I'll answer your questions in the chat, whether it's about Murray, Young, the draft. I saw a couple people mention that Lakers pick. I'll answer that question. Whatever it is you got, put it in the chat and we will talk about it and answer it all here. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be doing more of these during the offseason as well. Now for your second listen, you don't want yelling. You don't want yelling in your sports talk. It doesn't do any good. You're not actually learning anything. So if you're watching Fox Sports, ESPN, or something else, and you got to turn down the volume with all that shouting or just on tangents and stuff, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, news, opinions, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And please subscribe to Locked On Pelicans. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments over there because I can see everything and I appreciate y'all so much. So let's get into a couple of other things kind of regarding these two players here. And I want to start with this, something I said in this past week. Nothing's happening anytime soon on this. Not with the combine going on and people trying to kind of figure out what players they like and what their big boards look like. Not when there's some contract extensions that need to get figured out. Brandon Ingram being one of them, Donovan Mitchell being another. Those are dominoes that need to fall first. If they can't come to deals on extensions or players don't want them, well, that's then a sign that you maybe need to move people. But if Brandon Ingram were to take like a cut rate deal here, New Orleans would say yes, and that would end all trade talks right away. Same for Donovan Mitchell, right? If he's like, I want to stay here with Cleveland, it's going to end the trade talks. Simple as that. So if you're looking at that, then nothing's going to happen for a little bit. There's also some teams in the playoffs, right? You know, the Cavaliers are probably going to get like eliminated tonight. So nothing's going to happen anytime soon. And that leads to the next point, particularly about Donovan Mitchell, right? Jake Fisher of Yahoo's reported that Ingram might have more of a trade market than Trae Young does. You can get more than maybe we were expecting for Brandon Ingram. It's interesting and maybe changes how we view the trades that I just laid out for you. But let's roll with moving Ingram in one of these deals and bringing back either Trae Young or Dejounte Murray. So what does that do to the starting lineup? You would have, say, Trae Young or Murray, right? Then Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, Zion Williamson, and whatever the starting center is going to be here. Defensively, if you have Trae Young and CJ, that backcourt is a concern, and that is going to be a bit of a problem. Now, maybe you can outscore opponents, and look, it would be fun, right? Good defense isn't always the most fun thing to watch as opposed to offense, but defense definitely does matter, and the Pelicans were good at it last year, and this would impact that. It could change a little bit with the center. If they're a rim protector, you can maybe get away with that a little bit more so than you could. Or, so there's that. Trey Murphy isn't starting in this lineup either. That seems like something the Pelicans want to do. Could you get CJ McCollum to come off the bench? Potentially. You would then have Trae Young, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy. Two Treys in there is just confusing. Zion Williamson and whatever your starting center is, and I like that lineup. You get the height, you get the shooting from Trae, but Trae still needs to develop into a little bit more of a creator. I think. And I don't know if that's just the way he's going to be at the NBA level. Something that's also worth mentioning when it comes to Trae Young is he's a good lob thrower. We haven't had one of those in New Orleans since Lonzo Ball. How does that kind of change the dynamics of the offense and what you can do in the half court? And that's something that's worth looking at too. Would CJ McCollum come off the bench? I'm not sure. And I do think a lot of people forget that he did have a very good season. He had a very, very good regular season. Is he a complete player? Is he on the decline? Yes, absolutely, and not a complete player. But he was good this year, y'all. I think people forget that. He took 8.4 3-pointers per game and made them at a 43% rate. That's kind of insane. He shot significantly better than Trey Murphy did. Maybe you need to keep that shooting in the lineup. Something that's worth keeping in mind. Maybe you put Herb Jones on the bench. If you want to put more shooting around Zion, no one respects Herb Jones as a shooter, even if he was a good shooter this year. But because of the low volume, that changes things. Could you go Trae Young, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Zion in the center? That's 3 shooters around Zion. That's a pretty significant thing. But what are you going to do defensively then? And I think that becomes the big question. So some of that is a big part of the problem here, right? With Dejounte Murray, you have a shooter out there. You can run your offense too. Defensively, I think you're fine with him and CJ. So you can kind of get away with that. But it opens that question. That's one of the things that I've mentioned here, right? Is not which is the better player, Young or Murray. It's who's the better fit. Honestly, I think they've got to go a little bit more drastic if you want to try and break through this Western Conference. It's brutal. It's brutal. And one of the things I've said that David Griffin has said and others basically kind of just get, right, is if you're kind of staying the same, you're going to be moving backwards. Doing nothing and just kind of banking on a little bit of internal growth is actually going to be regression because other teams are going to make big moves. And that's not the position that you really want to be in, right? Memphis is going to be back and better. Utah is going to try and get better. Houston's going to try and get better. Golden State's going to try and get better. Who knows what the Kings are going to do? All of those teams missed the postseason. You can't just say, oh, we're better than them, because they still may surpass you. Murray, I think, is a little bit more of the status quo, will make you better, but how much? Trae Young, there's some boom or bust factor to it, but you've got to eventually take risks if you want to try and win a title, if you want to try and make a bigger splash. I get both of them. I would be happy with either of them on the team. I lean a little bit more towards Trae Young, particularly after as that game I mentioned from last night, with Jokic basically just being amazing and Rudy Gobert playing good defense. He's one of the best defenders ever, and he had no answer for Jokic. The Pelicans won't. So you're not going to get stops on them. You're going to need to outscore Denver. It's as simple as that. Trae Young's probably the guy that's going to do that for you. So that's kind of worth keeping in mind on how things look elsewhere in the NBA, in the Western Conference as well. There's concerns about some of the locker room stuff with Trae Young, but his dad kind of said the right thing. Murray's got some of the locker room concerns as well with all of that. So these are risks. But if you have a culture that's destroyed just because you brought Trae Young in, how strong was that culture in the first place? We're about to kind of find out with a lot of this, and that's worth keeping in mind as well. So here's what we're going to do. It's time for the interactive part. I'm completely looking at the chat over here right now. So I'm going to wrap up the show. Do not leave. I'm going to hit the little end card and everything like that too. And then we're going to go right into the bonus show here. So it's going to be a lot of fun. This is my chance to interact with y'all, for you to ask your questions. It's coming up here in 1 second on Locked On Pelicans. So that's going to do it for this live version of this, the live part of this of Locked On Pelicans, the regular show part of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll see y'all on Friday for another show. And if you're with me on YouTube, stay for like 10 more seconds. All right, we are done with the normal part of Locked On Pelicans. This is the interactive time here. for Locked On Pelicans. I'm looking at the chat. I try to not really look at it when I'm recording the normal part of the show because it's a little bit distracting. And a lot of people listen. People don't realize how many people listen on the podcast side of things. So interacting with the chat and then someone listening to it the next day, like, isn't the most enjoyable experience. So I try and avoid all of that here. So let's switch over to the interactive part here. Put your questions in the chat. If you are an everydayer, let me know. If you're planning on becoming an everydayer, let me know. Do you have other trade targets? Do you have more questions about Dejounte Murray? Do you have questions about Trae Young? We'll cover it all here. Chung says NOLA Jake after dark, except it's still light outside as it's 6:34 p.m. Central here. So sun's not going down just yet. We'll probably do a Locked On after dark at some point here. Let's start with this one. NOLA Star Bar. Everyone go check them out at 212 Loyola Avenue, by the way. And sponsor of Locked On Pelicans here. Where'd it go? What would it take to get Allen and Garland? I think you could get Allen and Garland for Brandon Ingram. Like, I think you could get both of those guys very easily. We're going to do a whole show on that too. We're going to do a whole show on like just kind of trade targets, just all the big name trade targets, right? Trade target Thursday, what it's going to be. We kind of started it with this episode here. Garland wasn't good, was not good this past year. And that's something that kind of concerns me. Like, how much of a lead guard is he truly? And I'm not sure. Like, he was kind of downright bad at times this year, and that's a concern. 18 points per game on 15 shot attempts, shot 6.2 3-pointers per game, 37%, 6.5 assists. Like, those are good numbers, don't get me wrong, but is that a better player than Brandon Ingram when he's a defensive liability? I'm not sure, but if you can get Garland and Allen, that does change things a little bit. I don't know if that's what Cleveland wants to do. They definitely need to split up their starting front court of Jared Allen and Mobley. Like, those two don't work together. You know, it might depend on what happens with Donovan Mitchell too. They desperately need a wing. So I think that's going to be an option as well for everything here. JH15 says, could the Pels please sign Tyus Jones or Malik Monk in free agency? They're not going to have much money in free agency. They're an over-the-cap team, so they don't have spending power in free agency. You're going to have the mid-level exception. Depending on where it's going to be, it's not going to be a ton. You're looking at maybe a $13 million contract. Both those guys, I think, are going to potentially get more than that. And so that's, I think, going to be part of the problem here for this team is you're going to have to reshape the roster through trades. Free agency isn't going to do it. Nick Beam says, Paul George or Jimmy Butler? I don't think Paul George is going to be realistic. I think the Clippers are going to run everything back. Jimmy Butler might be. You know, I talked about him a little bit on Locked On Pelicans in the past. I'm not sure if that's exactly the way to go. It's not a great three-point shooter. You know, he's aging. He's been injured. I just don't know if that's the way you really want to do this here. Doug Rosenthal says, going to put you on the spot. You're the GM. Do you trade for Trae or Dejounte? I would trade for Trae Young. I just think that would be fun. Like, it would be so much fun watching him and Zion Williamson together in a way that we haven't seen before. And I would love something like that. You know, don't forget this is entertainment. Just like enjoying ourselves is an important part of it. And I think those two together definitely could. Blake Johnson says, how about Mitchell from Cleveland? Can we get him? That's going to be a show as well. Potentially, if he doesn't want to sign an extension there, I think that's a big part of it. The Pelicans would need to kind of get assurances from him that he would resign before they were to trade for him. If he can't give you that, I don't think you can risk it. They're kind of running into the same problem that we're concerned about with Brandon Ingram is how does his future contract or lack thereof impact his value? And are you kind of getting rid of an asset for less than you want? Now, if he won't sign an extension there, yeah, they need to trade him to a team that he will want to sign an extension with. If he doesn't want to sign an extension in New Orleans, there's not a whole lot you can do there, and that's not something that I think the Pelicans would really risk whatsoever. Christopher DeVille says, let's go get Suggs from Orlando. Like, okay, sure, but what's that exactly going to do for you? He's an elite defender, and I think his offense got better this year. Well, let me pull that up. But I don't think they're really going to look to make like significant changes, right? He was a starter for them. You know, this is a guy, yeah, elite defender, but like the offense is coming along, but he started to become a bit of a 3-and-D guy for him. They were the third seed or the fourth seed, fifth seed, something like that. They were good. They were the 5th seed. They were good this year. They're only going to get better. I don't think they're looking to make a big change by shipping out a starting player for him. So I don't really see a deal like that kind of getting done here. Cameron Penton says, where did that just go? It just jumped on me. I saw that question. I liked it. Hold on. I'm getting back to it. That was a good question. It had to do with, I completely just lost it in the chat. It had to do with Lauri Markkanen. And I think the question was, how much do I value Lauri Markkanen? And it's not how much I value Lauri Markkanen. It's, yeah, there it goes. Cameron Penton. How much do you value Lauri Markkanen? It's not how much I value him. It's how much Utah values him. And if you look at what they requested for him, like they want the Rudy Gobert trade for Lauri Markkanen or more. That's too expensive for him. He's great. He's not a center. He's not a power forward. He's a small forward. He's a wing player. You could maybe mold Trey Murphy into him a little bit. He's good. I love him, but that's, I think, going to be out of the Pelicans' price range is what it would take. You're going to need to include Herb Jones in that trade minimum. I don't know, given everything else that you would need to put in there, if that's something that I really want here. Bo Biggie says, hey, Jake, when do the Pels need to make a decision on the Lakers pick? I believe it is June 1st. So that's when I think you'll see that starting to get kind of finalized with everything here. More on that on Friday's show. I want to look at that pick along with their head coaching search because there's something that I think maybe makes it contingent on that. So that's worth keeping in mind. That's going to be a future show here. Jeffrey Mosher says, every day, what can you tell us about Okongwu? Like, he's fine. He's fine. I don't think Okongwu is going to be a difference maker or anything like that. I don't think your starting center needs to be a difference maker for this New Orleans Pelicans team. Say you trade away Ingram, you bring someone back. You still have Zion. You still have Herb, right? Who was good last year. Really good offense. You have CJ. We just went over his shooting numbers. He was good. You'll have that other guy you traded for. Say it's Trae Young. Those are 4 guys that are going to be ahead of the starting center, right? You need a starting center that Willie Green is going to like, that gives you enough size to keep rebounding and can just hold their own defensively. If they can shoot threes, that's great. But if they're just athletic, I think that's going to go a really long way. So Okongwu fits that. Slightly undersized. Like, he's not an amazing player, to be perfectly honest with y'all, but he's a guy that kind of maybe fits the mold as your 5th best player for the team. That's okay. That's why the center, him, Okongwu, or Capella are kind of throw-ins in the trade, because you don't need, if you're making, I talked about this in yesterday's show, right? And I kind of said it in here. You can trade Brandon Ingram for Trae Young. Then you still need to figure out the center position. You can trade Brandon Ingram for, an impactful center. Then you still need to kind of figure out, is it Trey Murphy? But then you need some other things too. So you need to balance kind of both sides of those. And that's, I think, something to keep in mind here. Kerbo, suppose we get Yeka, Kongwu, Capella, Allen. What happens with Carlo? Because I'm somewhat high on him. He played in the G League, right? Like, is he NBA ready? Probably not. If he was, they would have put him on the team for the playoffs. They could have signed him. They could have done other things. I think they'll keep bringing him along, but that's a 2nd-round pick that doesn't always work out. Is it worth giving him some run? You'll see him in Summer League, other things like that. He played well enough in the G League, but I wouldn't say he lit it up. Worth keeping in mind. You're gonna get some hits, you're gonna get some misses. That's kind of how it goes that late in the draft and with your G League players here. Jonathan Mr. Shime says, every dayer, can Murray throw alley-oops? He throw a few. He's not as good as Trae Young is. But it's, I don't think you need a dude that's just like a lob thrower. Certainly if you get it, it doesn't hurt here. So that's okay. But look, if that's just kind of lanyap with a player, like you take that, right? Blake Johnson says, Murray or Trae would be good. We just need a healthy Zion in the postseason. Yeah, like that's the biggest thing. They need more than just a healthy Zion. You could see it, right? This team going up against the Nuggets, even the Timberwolves, even healthy against the Thunder, like they weren't going to win that series. They need some more things too. But a healthy Zion covers up a lot of it and goes, kind of far with some of this. JH15 says, can the Pels sign and trade Jonas Valanciunas? Yeah, but I don't think that's going to end up being how it goes. It depends on what team wants him and if they have the cap space for him, but I don't think he's going to have a big market. So any team that really wants him can probably get him on like a mid-level exception deal, and teams kind of have that. So I think that kind of fits. Kai the Great 84 says, how about Cole Anthony and Suggs from Orlando for BI? don't think they're looking to make that kind of change. I think if they can get someone, like, they have money in free agency to spend, so they could go sign Klay Thompson. Add Klay Thompson instead of BI and trading away one or two really useful players for you. Add to that core rather than kind of readjusting that group. So I don't think I really see Orlando, despite them, per FanDuel, sponsor of Locked On, having some of the best odds when it comes for it here. Brandon Sylvie says, any chance of Cat for BI? Probably not. Doesn't mean I'm not going to do a show on it at some point, but I don't see that being, I don't see Minnesota really kind of shaking things up. But let's see if they end up losing 4 straight games to the Denver Nuggets. And Karl-Anthony Towns, as good of a player as he is, does some really like dumb head-scratching things. So it's, you never know. You know, if you lose 4 straight games after winning 2, it's not a sweep, but you just kind of got swept. That's something that's worth keeping in mind as well when it comes to that. King McFly says, Jake, hi. BI for LaMelo and Mark Williams. That's kind of interesting. I don't hate that idea. LaMelo Ball, though, being a very injured player, do you want to take more injuries and put him on this team? You know, you don't know if those are going to continue or not, but we haven't had the best of luck when it comes to that sort of thing. So that is something that worries me a little bit when it comes to it. In the lack of games that he's played. He has one season where he's played a bunch, and that's really it. Last year, he played 22 games. The year before that, just 36 games. He's also, let me see. Oh, he shoots a ton of threes too. That's kind of interesting. I don't hate that idea. I don't know if Charlotte would do that, but they should definitely lead into building around Brandon Miller. That's a position that Ingram plays. So you have a little bit too much of doubling up of skill sets there, and I don't think that that's ultimately what they would want to go with. Let's see here. Matt N. Yep, Zion's health is the primary factor for success. Yeah, but you still need more, right? That'll get you far, but you're going to need other things that take you a little bit further too. So that's worth keeping in mind. I keep saying that. That's worth keeping in mind. But that's something you've got to kind of factor in as well. A healthy Zion, they weren't beating the Oklahoma City Thunder. They were not. Like, that wasn't going to happen. You could see it in that series. So you need more. You need to change other things as well here. Eric Reynolds says, brutal heat is firing up in Louisiana. Yeah, it's that time of year here. Everyone, get your air conditioning running. Tedrick Covington says, Butler would be that alpha man that can take that shot, that last shot when needed. Seems like Ingram doesn't want to do that. I don't want him being the number one guy over Zion Williamson. I don't think anyone wants that. And I wonder if he would step in and try and do that. And I don't know if that's an ideal situation here. So I don't think that that's the way to go with everything here. Richard Case says, Jake, tell Nick you can't win with Dwight, Maxey, or Tim Hardaway Jr. Pels need a real point guard first, can get a center anywhere. You know, that's funny. Nick is the Locked On Mavs host here. We'll see what happens in that series. So, yeah, I agree. And I talked about this in yesterday. And this is why you want to become an everydayer of Locked On Pelicans, right? Because we talked about this yesterday. Trust me, I'm going to cover everything on this channel. Helps when you're 5 days a week. You can get a starting center, I think, that'll be good enough in this draft. Not elite, but you don't need him to be elite. Do you just need someone who can give you somewhat of Derek Lively II gave the Mavs last year? Yeah, and I think you can get that a little bit in this draft. I think there's some value to be had at 17, 21 when it comes to that. So that is, I think, the way that they're going to end up going about this. Unless they really think a lob threat center is the way to go and then go and get Jared Allen, you're going to need to just kind of fill that position on the cheap, given what you would probably trade Brandon Ingram for. The other thing to kind of keep in mind with the starting center is there isn't a court spacing one out there. There's not going to be like an elite court spacing one that you can just get. So you may as well just kind of do it on the cheap and invest those resources in another player that's going to be a better difference maker for you. Just getting basically a better return on your investment or your assets, which is Brandon Ingram in this case. So I think that's worth keeping in mind here. Cameron Penn says, who could be an MLE player that could be added? I haven't looked at a ton of the free agents just yet, so we'll look at that a little bit further, once we get closer to the draft, because then free agency is going to come kind of right on the heels of that. So that's coming up a little bit later in the future. It's also going to depend on where the Pelicans are over the cap after any sort of trade. they might not spend that money. If you're already in the luxury tax, so that MLE amount, there's 3 different mid-level exceptions. There's the room mid-level exception, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, and then the taxpayer mid-level exception. They're all at different amounts. That middle one, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, is the one most people kind of equate to the MLE, but there's 3 of them and they're different amounts when it comes to that. Chung says there are many good centers in this draft. Who are your preferred options? I talked about it yesterday. I like Filipowski a lot. I think Kelly Ware could be a good fit, but I have big questions about his motor. There's a couple other players I think too that make a lot of sense, but I think one of those guys would be available to the Pelicans at 21. Deron Holmes, the second from Dayton too, I think would be a really good idea here. King McFly says, I'd like Bol off the bench for us too. All y'all, so Bol's got some stands, y'all. There's a Bol hive, and I am not part of it here. Matt N says, if getting Young required giving up Herb, do you do it? No, I would not at that point. I'd look elsewhere. Herb Jones, I think, is really important. We all love Herb Jones, so that's something that I would not mess with whatsoever here. So we're going to go a couple of more questions for y'all that are like kind of flying in here now, and I just got lost a little bit in all of this here. So let's see. Slow says, can the Pels get a starting 5 and backup 4 in this draft using the Lakers pick? I think you can get starting 5. Again, it's not an elite starting 5. It's going to be one of the worst starting centers in the league as a rookie, but I think you can get some stuff there. Backup 4, yeah, sure, you can get that. It doesn't mean they're good or what you really want. And so I think that's worth pointing out as well. Yeah, ABJ504 got a shout out. I see him saying, did I say? I said it earlier in there. You're the only person that I shouted out during the actual show because I appreciate you commenting literally every single day. There's a couple of y'all that are like the OG Locked On Pelicans listeners, the OG everydayers, and I truly appreciate all of that here. So thank y'all so much. Big Slim 225, here's a great one. Big Slim 225, it's not a question. He just says, keep Ingram. That might happen. That very well might happen. This is something I've talked about on the show, whereas a lot of other people are like, they're going to move him. Look, if the trade market doesn't exist and you can't get Trae Young, you can't get Murray, right? If you can't get them, you can't get Donovan Mitchell. You know, if it's just trading him for like multiple players or kind of like crap and picks, they're not going to do that, and they'll just work on re-signing him. So there is absolutely a world where Brandon Ingram is back, and that's something that's going to potentially happen, and we'll see how the trade market kind of shapes up with it. As I said earlier in the show, it's still really early on all of this. You're not going to see a ton of traction on things just yet. So that's going to be something that ends up like happening a little bit later. But if nothing is really there, yeah, they could easily bring Brandon Ingram back. Brandon Ingram is not bad. I don't know if he fits. There's questions about some things around him, but it's not like he's a horrible player or anything like that. So that is a guy that they could bring back, and then that's when you can then invest a lot of those resources in a new starting center that's a bigger, more impactful guy than if you were to trade Brandon Ingram for Trae Young or something along those lines. Other thing I should mention that I meant to mention in the regular show, I don't think you would trade Brandon Ingram for the number 1 overall pick in this draft. That makes Atlanta just too expensive. There's no way they'd end up doing something like that. They would still then need to trade Trae Young or Dejounte Murray, so they may as well keep the number 1 overall pick and then move those guys for another player. So I think that's where you're kind of looking at with it. Benny DeMarble says CJ for Cam Thomas. No, he's undersized. He could score, but that's not what you need on this team. JH15, Najee Dog, bring him back. Look, I'd like Najee on this team, but he's going to get paid, and the Pelicans don't have the money to give him. He's going to do great on Detroit on like a $12 million a year deal or something like that. Dawit D says, what about paying an ex-player like Dwayne D. Wade, who can teach a clinic? He made LeBron a champion. Maybe he can help seeing how this team is a real talent. I don't think he'd want to do that. He's a part owner of the Utah Jazz now, I think is what it is. Something like that. Like, I don't think he wants to do that. There's some players that want to get into coaching. JJ Redick, more on that on Friday's show, by the way, but I don't see Dwayne Wade really wanting to get into that. If he wanted to, he'd be here he'd be doing that already. I think he's quite happy sitting on his money, just kind of living his life and doing other things here. That's why we need to get King McFly says that's why we need to get another big who can do what Jonas didn't. Then we'll have the best of both worlds. If need be, Jonas can come off the bench. He's a professional. He's not going to want to come off the bench. He doesn't want to be here anymore. So Jonas is. Everyone I've talked to would be shocked if Jonas is back on this team next season here. Tedrick Covington says, I don't think he was fully healed when he came back to play. I'm assuming that means Brandon Ingram. Like, sure. I think that's a totally fair thing to say. And I think that impacted the way that he played. But at the same point, like, he played poorly. And there were also questions about the fit and his style of play earlier on in the year when he was healthy. Not really fitting into that Borrego offense that they wanted to run and the team kind of abandoning that. All of that's kind of a factor into this too. It's not just the playoff series. It's everything over the 82 games, the 2 playing games, and then the 4 playoff games that they had. So that's something that you've got to look at as a whole when it comes to all of that. All right, let's wrap it up there. Again, Brandon Ingram's not a bad player. That's worth keeping in mind too, and they very well may bring him back. I appreciate y'all so much for being here with a live show with me. We almost did 30 extra minutes here as well. We'll have another show on Friday that's going to involve the Lakers pick, JJ Redick, and a couple of other things too. And then we'll get you set for the week. And then there will be an episode. I see ABJ504. This is probably the Monday episode. Could we draft Bronny just to stick it to the Lakers? You better believe we're going to be talking about that here on Locked On Pelicans, probably on Monday. So a bunch of fun shows coming up for y'all. I appreciate everyone for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Please become everydayers. Listen Monday through Friday. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter. And now for the outro video again that's actually going to stick. See y'all later. That's the intro video. I want this one.